U.S. platoons vanish near the Rhine, their final transmission just one word: fog. In the dead of night, 32 soldiers huddle in an abandoned German village, finally tasting the quiet after months of brutal combat, their foxholes dug and radios crackling with routine check-ins. But when the search party arrives at dawn, they find rifles stacked in eerie precision, helmets circling a silent fountain, and every watch frozen at 3:51, as if time itself slammed shut on their screams. The fog lingers unnaturally thick, carrying whispers of copper and decay, hinting at an ancient hunger beneath the village stones that doesn't kill but traps souls in endless loops. What devoured those men whole, and why is the fog rolling back now, calling for more? The Rhine fog settles different than other fog. Private Eddie Santos learned this truth during his first night in Graufeld, though he couldn't articulate why. Regular fog moves with the wind, thins near heat sources, behaves according to natural law. The Rhine fog doesn't move, it waits. It presses against skin like wet wool, muffles sound until a man's own breathing becomes foreign, and carries smells that Santos's rational mind keeps trying to dismiss. Copper pennies, the mineral tang of old stone, something underneath that might be decay or might be nothing at all. Tonight, March 17, 1945, at 0341 hours, Santos hunches in the makeshift radio tent 2nd Platoon erected in Graufeld's abandoned town square. Canvas walls slap gently in what should be wind, but feels more like the fog itself breathing. His fingers tap the transmission key with the practiced rhythm of a man who's sent 1,000 status updates across a war-torn continent. Outpost 7 to Battalion. Situation nominal. No enemy contact. Visibility 0. Over. The response crackles back almost immediately. Roger. Outpost 7. Maintain position. Weather report shows fog lifting by Euro 600. Out. Santos acknowledges and logs the exchange in his field book. 0347 HRs. Status normal. He should feel relieved. Graufeld represents the first quiet posting 2nd Platoon has known since Utop Beach, 9 months and a lifetime ago. The Germans abandoned this village 3 weeks prior, leaving doors unlocked and tables set as if the entire population decided simultaneously that staying meant something worse than fleeing. Battalion needed forward observers near the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, 2 miles east where the Rhine flows dark and swollen with spring melt. Lieutenant Marcus Holloway had drawn the assignment like pulling a lucky lottery ticket. Except Graufeld doesn't feel lucky. Santos adjusts his headset and glances through the tent flap. Visibility hasn't improved since sunset. The fog bank rolled in around 1900 hours, materializing from the river valley with unnatural speed. Within minutes, it swallowed the church steeple, the fountain in the square, the foxholes Corporal Daniel Whitmore and Private Jimmy Chen spent all afternoon, digging into the half-frozen March ground. Santos can barely see the Coleman lantern hanging 3 feet from his face. Somewhere in that white nothing, 31 other men huddle in their positions. Staff Sergeant Owen Delacroix, the platoon's moral center, settled into the largest house on Graufeld's main street with the squad leaders for what he called a council of tired bastards who deserve hot coffee. Lieutenant Holloway claimed the village schoolhouse as headquarters, spreading maps across a teacher's desk while wearing that expression he gets, the one that suggests he's already writing lesson plans for the classroom waiting back in Portland, Maine, already imagining explaining the Rhine crossing to students who'll barely remember this war by the time they're his age. Santos rubs his eyes. He's been awake since 0400 yesterday, sustained by bitter Wehrmacht coffee looted from a bunker near Koblenz, and the knowledge that the war might actually end soon. The scuttlebutt says weeks, maybe a month before Berlin falls. 2nd Platoon survived the Bulge, survived the frozen Ardennes, survived battles whose names Santos still can't pronounce. 32 men who somehow stayed together when other units bled replacements like open wounds. They're so close to making it home. The fog shifts outside, and Santos freezes. It doesn't drift or thin. It shifts, a deliberate movement, like something large passing through water. The lantern flickers. Santos tells himself it's a draft, though the tent stands completely still. No wind, just that breathing pressure against the canvas. He checks his watch. 0351. 3 minutes until the next scheduled transmission window. His hand moves toward the frequency dial, some instinct suggesting he should call in early, break protocol, report that the fog feels wrong in ways he can't explain without sounding insane. His fingers actually touch the dial when he hears it. Footsteps. No, not quite footsteps. The memory of footsteps, like an echo arriving before the original sound. They come from every direction and no direction, inside the fog itself. Santos presses his headset tighter against his ears, listening through the static for anything rational. Boots on cobblestone, a guard making rounds, Delacroix checking positions. The footsteps circle the tent. Around and around, never stopping, never approaching, maintaining perfect distance. Santos's breath comes shallow now. He reaches for his rifle, then stops. What's he going to do? Shoot fog? The circling continues. 3 revolutions. 4. On the 5th, Santos realizes something that turns his spine to ice water. The footsteps match the rhythm of his own heartbeat. His hand finds the transmission key. Protocol screams at him to use proper call signs, proper procedure. But Santos's training dissolves in the face of whatever stands outside his tent made of mist and impossibility. He keys the microphone with fingers that barely respond to his brain's commands. He should warn them. Should explain that Graufeld holds something older than the war, older than the village, something the fog carries like disease. Should scream that they need to run, pack up, abandon the position, get back across the Rhine to somewhere the fog moves like fog should move. Instead, Santos speaks the only truth that matters, delivering it with the flat affect of a man reading grocery lists because emotion would crack the thin shell holding him together. Fog. 1 word. That's all his voice allows before his throat closes entirely, before the footsteps stop circling and simply wait, before every sound in Graufeld dies like someone turned down the universe's volume. Santos releases the transmission key. Static fills his headset. Normal, blessed static that proves the equipment still works, proves reality hasn't completely dissolved. He sits perfectly still in his canvas tent, surrounded by white nothing, listening to his heartbeat thunder in the silence. The fog presses closer. The lantern dims without burning lower. His watch ticks toward 0352, 0353, the second hand sweeping through moments that feel stretched thin. Santos wants to call out for Delacroix, for Holloway, for any of the 31 men he knows occupy foxholes and buildings within shouting distance. But shouting means opening his mouth, means breathing deeply, means drawing that copperstone decay fog into his lungs where it might carry something worse than gas. So he waits, radio headset tight against his ears, rifle across his knees, while Graufeld's fog settles heavier and the clock on his radio display glows steady. 0351:47. Then 0351:48. Then 2 miles west, in the relative clarity of battalion headquarters, a radio operator named Corporal Michael Webb stares at his equipment. He's been trying to raise Outpost 7 for the last 7 minutes, ever since that weird single-word transmission cut through proper military protocol. 17 attempts, 17 failures. Webb checks his connections, tests his frequency, confirms his equipment shows green across the board. The problem isn't on his end. He logs the incident in his duty book, 0354HRs, lost contact with Outpost 7, and walks outside to look east toward where Graufeld sits invisible beyond the hills. The fog bank looms there, a white wall rising like a mountain range from the Rhine Valley floor. It doesn't drift. It waits. Webb shivers and returns to his post, where he'll keep trying to raise 2nd Platoon every 10 minutes until dawn. The logs will show his attempts. The logs will prove he followed procedure, did everything right, maintained discipline even as the silence stretched and his unease grew. But some part of Corporal Michael Webb, the part that survived Normandy by trusting his gut, already knows the truth. 2nd Platoon, Charlie Company, 89th Infantry Division, 32 American soldiers in an abandoned German village 2 miles from the Rhine won't answer. Not at dawn, not ever, because in Graufeld, where the fog settles different, time stopped at 03:51:47 and refused to start again. The Jeep's engine cuts through the pre-dawn quiet, grinding over frozen ruts in the forest road. First, Sergeant William Rourke grips the passenger rail as the vehicle lurches, his eyes fixed on the eastern horizon where the Rhine fog sits like a wall of dirty cotton. The driver, a corporal from Baker Company whose name Rourke hasn't caught, keeps glancing sideways at him. "Sarge, you really think they just... what, fell asleep?" Rourke doesn't answer. He's been awake since the radio operator woke him at 0400. 3 words that shouldn't have meant anything. 2nd Platoon's gone silent. 3 more jeeps follow behind them, carrying 9 men total. Not enough for a proper sweep, but all battalion could spare with the push across the Rhine accelerating hourly. Staff Sergeant Carl Brenner rides in the second vehicle, a medic bag on his lap. He'd served with Owen Delacroix in North Africa, back when the war was young and men still believed their luck would hold. The fog bank grows as they approach Graufeld. It doesn't thin at the edges like normal mist. It simply is, a boundary between what makes sense and what doesn't. "Stop here," Rourke orders. They're still half a mile from the village. The driver kills the engine. In the sudden quiet, Rourke hears it, or rather doesn't hear it. No birds, no wind in the trees. Just the ticking of the cooling engine and someone's nervous breathing behind him. Brenner appears at his elbow. "Bill, this doesn't feel right." "Nothing about this feels right." Rourke pulls his rifle from the rack. "But 32 men are in there, and I'm not writing letters to their mother saying we were too spooked to look." They advance on foot, weapons ready, spreading into a loose line. The fog meets them at the village outskirts, swallowing the last jeep from view when Rourke looks back. The temperature drops 10 degrees in as many steps. His breath comes out white and hangs in the air longer than it should. The first house appears like a photograph developing, windows dark, door ajar. A Wehrmacht helmet lies in the mud outside, but there's no mud on it, just the helmet, clean as if placed there yesterday. "Clear left," someone calls. "Clear right." They move through empty streets. Rourke's heartbeat fills his ears. This is wrong in ways he can't name, wrong in the way the village feels arranged rather than abandoned. Laundry still hangs on a line, stiff with frost. A bicycle leans against a wall, but there's dust on everything, weeks' worth, except for the American boot prints leading toward the town square. The square. Rourke stops so suddenly that Brenner nearly walks into him. The rifles stand in perfect tripods around the medieval fountain, 32 weapons arranged with parade ground precision. The helmets ring the fountain's edge, evenly spaced, each, one facing inward. In the center, water should be flowing, but the fountain is dry, and at its heart sits Santos's radio tent, canvas panels hanging limp in the windless air. "Holy Mother of God," Brenner whispers. Rourke forces his legs to move. He approaches the nearest rifle stack, 3 M1 Garands, still in their slings, chambers clear. No mud, no scratches from being tossed aside in combat. He picks one up, reads the serial number, cross-references it mentally with the roster he memorized last night. Private Jimmy Chen's weapon. "Sarge, over here." One of the Baker Company men stands by a foxhole near the church. Rourke jogs over, his boots echoing too loud on the cobblestones. The foxhole is regulation depth, sandbags properly placed. Inside, cigarette butts, a K-ration tin, a water canteen with Whitmore's name scratched into the metal. and a letter, folded into quarters, addressed to Ruth in Pennsylvania. Rourke unfolds it carefully. The handwriting is steady, hopeful. "When this is over, I'm taking you to the shore like you always wanted. Just you and me and the ocean." It ends mid-sentence. "Check every hole," Rourke's voice cracks. "Look for signs of struggle, blood, anything." But there's nothing. Each position shows the same pattern. Evidence of occupation, then abandonment. No shell casings, no disturbed earth. The men simply stopped. Brenner emerges from one of the houses, his face ashen. "Bill, you need to see the headquarters." The schoolhouse Lieutenant Holloway requisitioned sites at the square's north end. Inside, the air smells of old wood and something else, copper, like pennies on the tongue. Maps cover one wall, unit positions marked in Holloway's precise hand. A coffee mug sits on the table, half full, a skin of mold floating on top. The journal lies open beside it. Rourke leans over without touching it. Holloway's handwriting, dated March 16th, fills the page in neat paragraphs about positioning, supply status, morale. Standard commander's log. Then, at the bottom, the ink darker as if the pen had pressed harder. "The fog here isn't like any fog I've seen. It moves wrong. The men say they hear." The entry ends there. Not mid-word, mid-letter. The dash trails off into nothing. "He stopped writing," Brenner says. "Just stopped." Rourke straightens, scanning the room. Holloway's pack leans against the wall. His sidearm hangs on its hook. Everything a man would take if he left. Still here. Outside, someone shouts. Rourke runs back to the square, where 3 men cluster around the church entrance. The heavy oak door stands open, revealing the bell tower beyond. "The bell!" one of them says, pointing upward. The tower mechanism is visible through the framework, a massive bell frozen mid-swing, the clapper an inch from the metal surface. The rope hangs taut, as if someone pulled it and time simply stopped. "What the hell could do that?" Brenner asks. Rourke doesn't answer because he's noticed something else. Every window in the square reflects the same scene. The fountain, the rifles, the helmets. But in one window, a second-story pane in the house where Delacroix had gathered his squad leaders, the reflection shows figures. Men in uniform, standing in a circle, facing inward. He blinks. The reflection is just glass and fog. "Check that house," he orders, pointing. "Top floor." They find the room empty except for 6 chairs arranged in a circle and 6 cold cups of coffee on the floor beside them. The men had been sitting here when what? Rourke's corporal appears in the doorway, holding a wristwatch. "Sarge, I've been checking the personal effects. Every watch we've found is stopped." "What time?" 3:51, all of them. The words settle like ice water in Rourke's gut. He thinks of Santos's transmission timestamp, 03:51:47. "The church clock," Rourke says. "Check it." They crowd into the tower. The mechanism is German-made, well-maintained despite the war. The hands point to 3:51. Rourke touches the minute hand carefully. It doesn't budge. The gears are locked as if welded in place. Back in the square, Rourke radios battalion. The static is worse than usual, crackling with interference. When he finally gets through, he keeps his voice level, professional. "This is Rourke. We've reached Graufeld. The village is abandoned. No sign of 2nd Platoon personnel. No signs of combat. All equipment left behind in good order. Request immediate support for expanded search." "Copy that. Any indication of enemy activity?" Rourke looks at the rifles, the helmets, the fountain, at the fog still pressing in from all sides. "Negative," he says. "No indication of enemy activity." But that's a lie, and he knows it. There is an enemy here, just not one that fires bullets. The radio operator's voice crackles back. "Stand by for instructions. Do not, repeat, do not proceed beyond the village perimeter." Too late for that, Rourke thinks. They're already inside whatever circle 2nd Platoon stepped into. He assigns 2 men to guard the vehicles, posts sentries at the village entrances, and begins a systematic house-to-house. They find more evidence of sudden abandonment. Meals half-eaten, gear half-packed, a game of cards frozen with hands still dealt. In the cellar of the bakery, someone finds 32 pairs of boots lined up against the wall, laces still tied. "They took their boots off?" Brenner's voice carries a note of hysteria. "In March? In combat?" Rourke kneels by the boots. They're dry, clean, not muddy from foxhole duty. He picks one up, Delacroix size, he'd bet money on it, and finds something inside. A photograph. 3 children on a porch in Louisiana smiling at the camera. Owen's kids. The ones he talked about every chance he got. "Bag everything," Rourke orders. "Every personal item, every piece of equipment. If there are families to send these to, by God, we're going to send them. By 1,000 hours, the fog still hasn't lifted. If anything, it's thicker." Rourke stands in the town square, surrounded by the artifacts of 32 lives that ended, or paused or something, at 3:51 in the morning. Brenner approaches with a canteen. "Drink. You haven't had water in 4 hours." Rourke takes it mechanically. "Carl, you fought at Kasserine. You were at Anzio. You ever see anything like this?" "No." Brenner's hands shake as he lights a cigarette. "I've seen men die. Every way war can kill them. This isn't war. This is something else." A shout from the southern perimeter. Rourke and Brenner run. Rifles. The journal lies open on the oak table, its edges curled with age and damp. Rourke stands above it, his breath fogging in the stillness of the schoolhouse that 2nd Platoon had converted into headquarters. The room smells of chalk dust and old wood, the same scent that must have lingered when German children filled these desks before their families fled. Lieutenant Marcus Holloway's handwriting marches across the page in neat, teacher-precise lines. The entries begin days earlier, noting grid coordinates, patrol rotations, ammunition counts, the mundane accounting of war. Rourke's eyes skip forward to March 16th, the final date. "The fog here isn't like any fog I've seen. It moves wrong. The men say they hear." The sentence ends there. No period. No indication Holloway was interrupted mid-word. The pen simply stopped, as if time itself had frozen the lieutenant's hand before he could form the next letter. Private Jimmy Chen steps closer, peering over Rourke's shoulder. "Sir, what does he mean, moves wrong?" Rourke doesn't answer. His gaze lifts from the journal to the window, where pale morning light struggles through glass so grimy it turns the world sepia. Outside, the fog has thinned but not vanished. It hovers at knee-height now, clinging to cobblestones like something reluctant to leave. "Fan out," Rourke says. "Check every building, every room. I want personal effects cataloged, anything that might tell us where they went." The men disperse with the scrape of boots on floorboards. Staff Sergeant Carl Brenner lingers, his jaw working on nothing. He's older than the rest, pushing 40, with lines carved deep around his eyes from North Africa to Italy to here. Rourke has watched Brenner face German artillery without flinching, but now the man's hands shake as he lights a cigarette. "This ain't right, Bill," Brenner mutters, smoke curling from his nostrils. 32 rifles stacked like they're on parade, every helmet placed just so. That's not retreat. That's not capture. I know. You know what it is?" Brenner's voice drops to a rasp. "It's ritual, like they were offering themselves to something." The word hangs between them, ugly and impossible. Rourke closes the journal carefully, as if rough handling might erase Holloway's final thoughts. He slides it into his pack for transport back to battalion. Though he knows no regulation covers what to do with evidence of what? There's no manual for this. Outside, a shout echoes from the direction of the church. Rourke and Brenner exchange a glance before jogging across the square, past the fountain where 32 helmets still ring the dry basin like a crown of steel. Private Chen waves from the church's arched doorway, his face pale. The church interior is cold enough that their breath plumes. Wooden pews sit empty beneath stained glass windows depicting saints Rourke doesn't recognize. The altar holds dust and nothing else. No crucifix, no offerings. Whatever god watched over Grafeld abandoned this place long before the Americans arrived. Chen points upward. "The bell, sir. Look at the bell." The tower rises above them, accessible by a narrow ladder. Rourke climbs, wood creaking beneath his weight, until he emerges into the cramped bell chamber. Morning light slants through the louvers in thin bars. The bell itself is massive, iron darkened with centuries of use. But it's not the bell that stops Rourke's breath. The clapper hangs suspended 3 inches from the bell's inner surface, not swinging, not resting, simply frozen mid-strike, as if an invisible hand halted its arc at the precise moment of contact. Brenner's head appears through the trap door. "Jesus Christ!" "Check the mechanism," Rourke orders, though his voice sounds distant to his own ears. Brenner hauls himself up, moving to the bell tower's clockwork system, a maze of gears and weights that should govern the hourly chimes. He crouches, examining the bronze cogs. "Stopped," he announces. 3:51, same as the watches. Rourke reaches out, hesitates, then touches the clapper. The metal is ice cold, despite the day warming outside. He tries to move it, pulling gently at first, then harder. It doesn't budge. The clapper might as well be welded in place. "That's not possible," Chen says from below, his voice echoing up. "Gravity alone should—" "Nothing about this is possible, Private." Rourke releases the clapper, his fingers aching from the cold. "But it's happening anyway." They descend in silence. Outside, the search teams are emerging from houses with armfuls of equipment. Corporal Davies carries a stack of letters bound with string. Private Morton holds a mess kit still crusted with the remains of someone's last meal. Each item is a fragment of interrupted lives, evidence of men who expected to return to these things once their watch ended. Rourke organizes the collection in the town square, arranging items on a tarp spread across the cobblestones. Dog tags when they find them. Photographs of wives and children. A harmonica. 3 decks of cards, one with the ace of spades bent at the corner. Corporal Daniel Whitmore's letter to Ruth, sealed in an envelope he must have planned to mail when supply trucks came through. The personal effects paint a picture Rourke doesn't want to see. Men settling in for a routine posting. Men who felt safe enough to remove their boots, to write letters home, to leave rifles unattended. Men who had no warning that something was coming for them in the fog. "Sir," Private Morton approaches, holding a wristwatch. "Found this in one of the foxholes. Delacroix." Rourke takes it, recognizing the scratched steel casing. Owen Delacroix had won the watch in a poker game in Belgium, claimed it was his good luck charm. The face shows 3:51, the second hand frozen between the 10 and 11, but there's something else. Rourke tilts the watch toward the light. The crystal is fogged from the inside, condensation trapped beneath the glass. And in that fog, barely visible, a shape moves. Just for a moment, a shadow that crosses from one side to the other, independent of any external light source. Rourke blinks. The shadow is gone, just moisture and tricks of morning sun. "Bag it," he tells Morton, handing the watch back. "Bag everything. The families will want these." Brenner appears from the direction of the bakery, his expression troubled. "You need to see the cellar." They walk together, leaving Chen to coordinate the collection effort. The bakery sits on Graufeld's eastern edge, a 2-story building with faded lettering above the door. Inside, the counter still holds a scale and empty shelves. Flour dust coats everything like snow. The cellar stairs descend steeply. Brenner produces a flashlight, its beam cutting through absolute darkness. The space below is larger than Rourke expected. Brick walls extending into shadows, wooden support beams crossing overhead. And along one wall, arranged in perfect rows, 32 pairs of boots. Rourke moves closer, his own boots echoing on packed earth. The boots are American issue, worn but serviceable. Each pair is laced completely, tied in regulation knots. No mud on the soles, no scuff marks, They look freshly cleaned. They took off their boots, Brenner says quietly. Every last one of them came down here and took off their boots. Rourke crouches beside the nearest pair. Inside one boot, tucked where the tongue meets the leather, is a photograph. A woman with 2 small children, smiling outside a clapboard house. He recognizes Owen Delacroix's handwriting on the back. Marie, Thomas, and little Anne. Spring, 1944. Why? Chen asks from the stairs, having followed them down. Why would they? I don't know. Rourke stands, the photo still in his hand. He can't escape the feeling that he's looking at something sacred. Something left behind deliberately, like offerings at a shrine. Search the rest of the cellar. I want to know if there's anything else. There isn't. Just the boots, lined up with military precision, and the overwhelming sense that 32 men walked down these stairs in their sock feet and never came back up. They emerge into daylight that seems too bright, too normal. Across the square, the collection effort continues. Private Davies has found more letters, more photographs. The pile grows with each passing minute, a mountain of interrupted lives. Rourke's gaze drifts to the fountain where the fog still lingers in wisps. As he watches, one of those wisps moves, not with the wind, which is blowing from the west. This fog slides eastward against the breeze before dissipating near the church steps. Sir? Chen is watching him. Your orders? Rourke tears his attention from the fog. Establish a perimeter. I want sentries posted at every road in and out of this village. No one enters until battalion sends support. What about the men? 2nd platoon? The question everyone is thinking, but no one wants to voice. Rourke looks at the empty village, the frozen clocks, the carefully arranged evidence of departure without departure. They're gone, he says finally. Where they went? He trails off, lacking words. I don't know, but something happened here at 3:51 this morning. Something that stopped time and took 32 soldiers out of this world. The Germans? Chen suggests, but his tone says he doesn't believe it. No. Rourke shakes his head. The Germans would have left bodies or taken the weapons. This is... He gestures at the square, encompassing the impossibility of it all. This is something else. Brenner joins them, cigarette dangling from his lips. I've been in this war since Kasserine, Bill. I've seen men die in every way the devil can imagine, but I ain't never seen anything like this. He exhales smoke. This ain't war. This is something the military police convoy reached Graufeld just after noon on March 18th, kicking up mud along the rutted valley road. 3 jeeps and a canvas-topped truck, 21 men in total, all carrying the tight expressions of soldiers who'd been briefed on something that made no tactical sense. Captain Theodore Walsh stepped out first, his boots hitting the cobblestones of the square with a deliberate thud that echoed too loudly in the stillness. Behind him came Lieutenant James Krieger from Intelligence, clipboard already in hand, and a photography specialist named Corporal Tim Brennan who carried his speed graphic like it might explode. First Sergeant Rourke met them at the fountain, saluting with mechanical precision. His face had aged since dawn, new creases around the eyes, a tightness in his jaw. "Show me," Walsh said. They walked the scene in silence. The captain circled the rifle tripods 3 times, counting under his breath. He knelt beside one stack, running his finger along the barrel of a spotless M1 Garand. No mud, no dust. The metal gleamed as if freshly cleaned. "These weren't dropped," Walsh said. "They were arranged." "Yes, sir." "By who?" Rourke didn't answer. What could he say? Lieutenant Krieger photographed everything, the helmets at precise intervals, the radio tent with its open logbook, the coffee cups arranged in that upstairs room. Brennan's flash powder popped and hissed, each burst of light making the shadows jump and resettle wrong. The interrogations began in the schoolhouse where Holloway had made his headquarters. Rourke's team sat on children's desks, boots dangling, while Krieger worked through them one by one. Private Jimmy Chen, the youngest of the search party, kept wringing his hands. "The boots, sir. Why would they take off their boots? It was near freezing. Did you see any footprints, socks, bare feet?" "No, sir. Nothing." Staff Sergeant Carl Brenner, who'd lived through Kasserine and seen things that gave other men nightmares, refused to speculate. When pressed, he just shook his head. "I've seen men break under fire. I've seen whole units routed by panzers. This ain't that. This is something else." "What else?" Brennan's jaw worked. "Don't know, sir. Don't want to know." By mid-afternoon, Walsh had authorized an expanded search radius. MPs fanned out in pairs, working through the dead fields and thin pine woods that surrounded Graufeld. They looked for tracks, disturbed earth, shell casings, bloodstains, bodies. Anything. They found old German fortifications, trenches grown over with weeds, a machine gun nest that hadn't been used in months. They found a barn 3/4 of a mile north with rotting hay and frozen cattle that had starved when the villagers fled. No Americans, no trace. At 1600 hours, a jeep returned from the German POW camp at Linz, 15 miles south. 2 MPs escorted a prisoner, a wizened Wehrmacht corporal named Ernst Vogel, who'd been captured near Remagen the previous week. Intelligence had flagged him because his unit had operated in this sector. They sat him in Graufeld's church, his wrists bound, guards flanking. Walsh and Krieger took the pews opposite. Rourke watched from the doorway. Krieger spoke passable German. "You know this village?" Vogel's eyes darted to the frozen bell mechanism above. "Graufeld. Ja. Your unit passed through here?" "We did not pass through. We went around." He said it quickly, definitively. "Why?" The prisoner's face went careful. "Orders." "Whose orders?" "Captain Steiner. He said Graufeld was verboten, off limits." Vogel's gaze dropped to his bound hands. "The fog here is bad. Unnatural." Walsh leaned forward. "Unnatural how?" For a long moment Vogel said nothing. Then, in barely accented English, "The old fog's hunger." The words hung in the cold air. Brennan's camera clicked, capturing the prisoner's haunted expression. "Explain," Krieger demanded. But Vogel's mouth clamped shut, his jaw set. Whatever he knew or believed, he wouldn't share it. Not with threats, not with promises. The interrogation ended after 40 minutes of circular questioning. As the MPs loaded him back into the jeep, Rourke caught Vogel's eye through the canvas. The German held his gaze, then spoke softly in English. "Your men. They heard it calling in the fog, yes? They should not have answered." The jeep drove away, leaving Rourke standing in the square as the quay. March wind picked up. By evening, Walsh gathered his officers in Holloway's commandeered schoolhouse. Maps covered the teacher's desk. Red pins marked Graufeld, the Rhine, the positions of surrounding Allied units. Black pins showed where the missing platoon should have been. "Working theories," Walsh said, lighting a cigarette. Krieger consulted his notes. "Mass desertion seems impossible. They left weapons, personal effects, money. No rational deserter abandons cash and photographs." "Chemical weapons?" someone suggested. "The Jerrys used gas in the last war." Medical examined the site. No residue, no traces. The recon team showed no symptoms. "Ambush and capture, then. Germans took them in the fog, cleaned the scene." Walsh shook his head. "No tracks, no vehicle marks, no evidence of forced march. And why stack the rifles like that? Why not take them?" He dragged on his cigarette. "The Germans we've captured are half-starved. They need weapons more than theater." "Then what, sir?" The captain stared at the red pin marking Graufeld. "I don't know. But I know this village has history. Intelligence found records. The German civilians evacuated 3 weeks ago. 200 people, overnight. Left everything. Why? They won't say. They're in Koblenz now, living in church basements and warehouses. When our people questioned them about Graufeld, they got agitated. Some cried. One old woman spat and made a warding sign. Rourke spoke from the doorway. "What kind of sign?" "Catholic, against evil." Walsh met his eyes. "She said her grandmother told stories. Graufeld disappears people in the fog, always has, since the plague times." Silence settled. Someone coughed. The maps rustled. "With respect, sir," Brenner said carefully, "that's superstition. Maybe. But 32 men are gone, and every watch in this village stopped at the same moment. They had no answer for that. At 1900 hours, darkness came early under thick clouds. Walsh posted sentries around the village perimeter and ordered the rest to bivouac in the larger buildings. No one would spend the night in foxholes or tents. No one would be alone. Rourke stood on the hilltop north of Graufeld, watching the Rhine Valley as the last light bled from the sky. 2 miles east, the river moved sluggish and gray. Somewhere beyond it, the war continued. Artillery rumbling, tanks grinding forward, men dying in ways that made sense. Behind him, Graufeld sat silent in the gathering dark. Lights glowed in windows now as the MPs settled in. But the village felt wrong. Empty in a way that had nothing to do with the missing platoon. As if something had been here long before the Americans, long before the Germans, before the medieval church and its frozen bell. He watched the fog begin its crawl up from the river. It came in tendrils first, pale wisps that snaked through the trees. Then thicker plumes, rolling like something alive, something purposeful. By 1930 hours, the valley had disappeared beneath a white blanket that swallowed distance and muffled sound. Rourke descended to the village square where Walsh stood with his senior NCOs, all of them watching the fog's approach. "Visibility's dropping fast," Brenner reported. "Maybe 20 feet. Walsh's jaw tightened. "Double the sentries. No one goes anywhere alone. And if anyone hears anything, voices, footsteps, anything, they report immediately." "Sir." Rourke's voice was steady, but something cold had settled in his chest. "Permission to speak freely." "Granted." "I don't think we should stay here tonight." Walsh turned, eyes sharp. "Explain." Rourke chose his words carefully. "Whatever happened to 2nd Platoon happened at night, in fog like this. We're setting ourselves up for the same conditions. If there's a threat, chemical, psychological, whatever it is, we're giving it another target. We need to secure the site. The site isn't going anywhere, sir. But if we lose 20 more men..." "That's enough, Sergeant." Rourke fell silent. But he saw it in the captain's face. The same unease, the same calculation. Walsh wasn't stupid. He felt it too. The fog reached the village edge at 2000 hours. It poured between buildings like water finding cracks, thick and impossibly white. Temperatures dropped. The sentries stamped their feet, breath misting. At 2147 hours, Private First Class Martin Delaney, stationed on the western perimeter, radioed in. His voice crackled with static. "Command, this is West Sentry 2. I've got movement. Repeat, movement in the fog approximately 40 yards out." Walsh grabbed the radio. "Can you identify?" "Negative, sir. It's just shapes. Walking. No, not walking. Wrong rhythm." "How many?" "Can't tell. The fog's too thick. It's like they're..." A pause. "Sir, they're not making footprints. The mud's not disturbed." Every man in the command post went still. "Fall back to the square," Walsh ordered. "All sentries, withdraw to central position. Now." They came in from the perimeter, 6 men appearing out of the fog with rifles ready and eyes wide with the unspoken fear that the night had only begun. The Graufeld file disappeared into the labyrinth of military bureaucracy like smoke dissolving into fog. Days became weeks. The Rhine crossings accelerated. Patton's Third Army pushed eastward. Eisenhower's broad front strategy grinding German resistance into dust. By late March, Graufeld sat 20 miles behind the front lines, a curiosity in a landscape glutted with mysteries. Missing soldiers, unexplained phenomena, and classified incidents multiplied across occupied Germany like wildflowers after rain. 2nd Platoon became a footnote. Captain Theodore Walsh submitted his final report on March 30th. The document ran to 11 pages, meticulously detailing every fruitless search, every dead-end interrogation, every inexplicable artifact. He concluded with the only honest assessment available. Circumstances of disappearance remain unexplained. No evidence of enemy action, desertion, or natural causes. Recommend continued monitoring of sector and immediate evacuation if similar phenomena recur. The report traveled through channels. Division to Corps, Corps to Army, Army to Theater Command. Each level added stamps, signatures, and cautionary notes. By April 15th, it reached a basement office in SHAFE headquarters in Versailles, where a tired clerk filed it under MIA, unresolved. The folder went into a steel cabinet alongside 300 others. The key turned with a click that felt permanent. First Sergeant William Rourke remained at Graufeld through early April, long after the MPs departed, long after the exclusion zone designation came down. He posted himself in the town square, sleeping in the same schoolhouse where Lieutenant Holloway had set up headquarters. The personal effects still lay where his men had bagged them: letters, photographs, dog tags in neat rows on a classroom desk. Every morning, Rourke checked them, counting, touching, making sure they hadn't vanished too. Staff Sergeant Carl Brenner visited twice before his unit shipped east. The first time, he stood in the square for an hour, saying nothing, just staring at the fountain where the helmets had been arranged. The second time, on April 8th, he brought whiskey stolen from an officers' club. They sat on the schoolhouse steps as dusk fell, passing the bottle. "You should leave," Brenner said. "This place is eating you alive." Rourke took a long pull. The whiskey burned pleasantly. "Someone needs to remember what happened here." "We all remember. The whole damned company remembers." "Not what I mean." Rourke gestured toward the square with the bottle. "Need to remember it right. Not let it become another war story. Not let them turn into numbers on a casualty list." Brenner was quiet for a long time. In the distance, artillery rumbled, so constant now it blended with the sound of the wind. "You think they're dead?" he finally asked. Rourke considered lying. Considered saying yes, of course. What else could they be? But here, in this place where every watch had stopped at the same impossible moment, lies felt dangerous. "I don't know what they are," he admitted, "but they're not just gone. Something took them, something that's still here." As if to punctuate his words, fog began creeping through the streets. Thin wisps at first, ghostly tendrils that seemed to test the air. Both men stood immediately, hands moving instinctively toward rifles. The fog thickened. Then, after several minutes that felt longer, it retreated, pulled back like an animal reconsidering its approach. Brenner left within the hour. Rourke never saw him again. On April 23rd, a fresh incident shattered the sector's fragile calm. Second Lieutenant Peter Morrison led a four-man patrol from the 78th Division through the hills west of Remagen, mapping German positions for the operational archives, standard reconnaissance. They'd done it 100 times. At 14:30 hours, Morrison radioed his position, 2 miles northeast of Graufeld, following a ridgeline toward Koblenz. Weather clear, visibility good. Expected return by 1700. At 16:55, his radio man transmitted again. Just 2 words, spoken with flat certainty. "The fog." Then static. The 78th sent out search parties immediately. By nightfall, they'd found Morrison's Jeep parked on the ridge, engine still warm. 4 rifles leaning against the hood in a neat tripod. 4 helmets lined up on the front bumper, facing inward. No bodies, no tracks, no signs of struggle. 4 watches, all stopped at 4:52 p.m. This time, the Army didn't investigate. The patrol was declared MIA within 6 hours. The site was photographed, catalogued, and abandoned. The 78th Division moved east the next morning, but the pattern was established now, visible to anyone willing to look. Word filtered through intelligence channels, whispered in mess tents and command posts. Rhine Valley fog, disappearances, time anomalies. The stories accumulated like sediment, building layers of unease. On March 29th, a British engineering unit reported temporal distortion and impossible geography near Bad Godesberg, 15 miles south of Graufeld. Their after-action report described hours that seemed to stretch, landmarks that appeared and vanished, and a pervasive sense of being watched by something vast and patient. They withdrew from the sector immediately. No argument from their colonel, who'd served in Burma and knew when terrain was actively hostile. Rourke compiled every incident he could find, cross-referenced dates, locations, weather conditions. The pattern emerged clearly. Fog events, temporal anomalies, vanishings. A radius roughly 20 miles across centered on Graufeld. He tried submitting his findings to intelligence. The report came back stamped, "Noted, no action required." The war had its own momentum now, and Graufeld couldn't slow it down. VE Day came on May 8th. Europe erupted in celebration. In Graufeld, William Rourke sat alone in the schoolhouse, a bottle of champagne someone had left unopened on his desk. He didn't drink it. Instead, he wrote letters, 32 of them, one for each family. He knew the army would send telegrams, cold, official notifications. Missing in action, circumstances unknown. But the families deserved more than bureaucratic language. They deserved to know their sons, husbands, fathers had been remembered. That someone had stood in the place they vanished and refused to look away. Each letter was different. Personal. For Owen Delacroix's wife, he described finding the family photograph in the boot, preserved like a relic. For Ruth Whitmore, he mentioned the unfinished letter Daniel had been writing, how the final sentence promised they'd walk together again soon. He couldn't give them answers, but he could give them witness. The letters went out on May 10th. Rourke shipped east the next day, reassigned to occupation duties in the Ruhr Valley. He left the personal effects in the schoolhouse, arranged exactly as his men had catalogued them. Someone from Graves Registration would collect them eventually. Before he left, he walked through Graufeld one final time. The village felt different now, emptier, if that was possible. The fog hadn't returned since Morrison's patrol disappeared. The silence was absolute. In the town square, Rourke stopped by the fountain, dry as bone, just as it had been that first morning. He touched the stone rim where the helmets had rested. "I'm sorry," he said to the empty air. "I'm sorry we couldn't bring you home." The wind picked up. Just for a moment. It sounded almost like a response. Then silence returned, heavy and complete. Rourke walked away without looking back. Some things were too dangerous to watch. 3 weeks later, Allied headquarters declared Graufeld an exclusion zone. Officially, unexploded ordnance and structural instability. The truth lived in classified addendums that traveled through channels, accumulating stamps and signatures before vanishing into archives. The village was sealed. Fences went up. Guards rotated through weekly shifts, none staying longer than necessary. The orders were clear: no entry, no investigation, no discussion. By June, the case file on 2nd Platoon was locked in a vault beneath the War Department building in Washington. The classification read, "Missing in action. Circumstances unexplained pending future review." The future never came. Families grieved. Children grew up with photographs instead of fathers. Wives remarried or didn't. The years accumulated. Memory faded into history, then history into footnote. The Graufeld incident became a ghost story told by old soldiers in VFW halls. Another Rhine Valley mystery. Another unsolved disappearance in a war full of them. The fog kept its secrets. And in the sealed village, where no one was permitted to walk, the church clock remained frozen at 3:51. The fountain stayed dry. The shadows held shapes that appeared only in peripheral vision, never quite solid enough to confirm. Time itself seemed to wait. For what? No one could say. But something beneath the stones remembered 32 men who'd answered a call they couldn't refuse. Something patient and ancient, accustomed to waiting. It had waited through plague years and wars and centuries of forgetting. It could wait longer still. The fog would return. It always did. And when it came again, rolling thick and copper-scented through the Rhine Valley, it would remember exactly where the door had opened. Exactly how to call. The year turns like a wheel. Grinding toward forgetting, April 1945 sweeps across Europe with the force of 8 million men pushing east, Artillery thunder drowning out whispered questions about 32 soldiers who vanished into Rhine fog 3 weeks prior. The Allied advance devours villages and cities, forests and rivers, momentum building toward Berlin with the inevitability of floodwater finding low ground. In Washington, the War Department processes 40,000 casualty reports per week. 2nd Platoon, Charlie Company, 89th Infantry Division, becomes a single manila folder in a filing cabinet on the 3rd floor of the munitions building. Stamped, MIA. Circumstances unexplained in red ink that will fade to rust brown over the decades. Captain Theodore Walsh types his final report on April 15th, carbon paper creating 3 copies that will scatter to different archives. His fingers hesitate over the keys when he reaches the section marked Probable Cause. The cursor blinks. Outside his requisitioned office in Remagen, trucks rumble past carrying supplies for the Ruhr offensive. He types, Unknown. Recommend continued investigation. The recommendation vanishes into bureaucratic machinery already shifting gears toward occupation planning and demobilization. By April 20th, Walsh receives orders to Frankfurt. The Graufeld file moves to a different desk, a different officer, a different priority level that means the same thing as forgotten. First Sergeant William Rourke stays longer than anyone. He requisitions the abandoned schoolhouse in Graufeld. Stacking the platoon's personal effects on wooden desks meant for German children who fled weeks before their own government's collapse. 32 sets of belongings arranged with parade ground precision. Helmets on the left, rifles against the wall, smaller items in labeled boxes. Corporal Daniel Whitmore's letter to Ruth. Private Jimmy Chen's Chinese-English dictionary. Staff Sergeant Owen Delacroix's photo of 3 children squinting into Maine sunshine. Rourke sleeps in the schoolhouse, too, his bedroll on the floor near the wood stove. He maintains a log book, recording atmospheric conditions 3 times daily. Fog density, temperature, wind direction. The data means nothing to meteorologists, but Rourke fills pages with careful observations searching for patterns in something that has no pattern except hunger. Staff Sergeant Carl Brenner visits twice in early April. The first time, he brings whiskey in a canteen and news from the Ruhr. Germans surrendering in divisions, their officers asking only that the Soviets not reach them first. They sit on the schoolhouse steps as evening settles over the empty village square, the fountain still dry, the stacked rifles covered with canvas tarps against spring rain. "You should go," Brenner says, not looking at the square. "I will," Rourke replies. "Soon." The second visit comes April 8th, the night the fog tries again. Rourke is at his desk updating the log by lamplight when Brenner pounds on the door at 2200 hours. The older sergeant's face carries that particular expression soldiers develop when something crosses the line from dangerous into wrong. It's back. They stand together in the doorway, watching tendrils of fog probe the square like blind fingers testing locked doors. The mist moves against the wind, curling around the covered rifles, reaching toward the schoolhouse with deliberate intent. Rourke's thermometer drops 6 degrees in 4 minutes. "Tell me I'm seeing this," Brenner whispers. "You're seeing it." The fog hovers at the schoolhouse steps for 17 minutes while both men watch without speaking. Then it retreats, flowing back toward the Rhine with the same unnatural purpose, leaving the square clear under cold stars. Brenner leaves the next morning. He shakes Rourke's hand, holds it longer than necessary. "Kasserine, Anzio, the Gothic line. I've seen men die in every way a man can die." His voice carries the weight of 3 years' combat. "But this place, there's something patient here, something that can wait." "I know." "Then why stay?" Rourke looks at the boxes of personal effects, thinking of 32 families who will receive telegrams with no bodies to bury, no final moments to imagine. Someone has to bear witness. He never sees Brenner again. Later, he learns the sergeant's convoy was hit by remnants of the 6th SS Mountain Division near Würzburg. Brenner took shrapnel to the chest and died before reaching the field hospital. A soldier's death, comprehensible in its violence. Not like Graufeld. April 23rd brings a new vanishing. Rourke is checking the perimeter when he hears the jeep. Second Lieutenant Morrison and 3 men from the 78th Division lost while ferrying dispatches between Remagen and Bad Godesberg. Morrison asks directions with the casual confidence of someone who thinks fog is just weather. Rourke gives him a route that bypasses Graufeld entirely. "Don't stop if you hit fog banks. Keep your headlights on and maintain speed." Morrison nods, already turning away. "Just fog, Sergeant. We've driven through worse." They find the jeep the next morning, abandoned on the road 2 miles northeast. The engine still runs, fuel tank 3/4 full, 4 rifles stacked in a tripod pattern on the hood, 4 helmets arranged on the seats. All watches stopped at 4:52 p.m. Rourke walks the site in widening circles, finding nothing. No tracks, no spent casings, no blood. Just the jeep and its careful display of military equipment, as if the men stepped out to inspect something and simply chose not to return. But soldiers don't choose. They follow orders, seek shelter, retreat under fire. They don't vanish into empty air. He adds Morrison's platoon to his log, drawing a second circle on his map of the Rhine Valley. 20 miles separate the 2 vanishing points, but both lie within sight of the river, both occurred during fog events, both left behind the same ritual arrangement. The Army sends investigators. Rourke files his report, includes his atmospheric observations and pattern analysis. He suggests establishing a no-entry zone, maintaining surveillance, studying the meteorological anomalies. The investigators thank him politely and file everything under combat stress. Recommend rotation to rear area. By April 29th, another incident surfaces. A British engineering unit reports impossible geography and temporal distortions near Bad Godesberg before withdrawing. Their colonel's report reads like fever dreams. Streets that looped back on themselves, watches running backward, fog that tasted of copper and old stones. The report receives the same treatment as Rourke's. Acknowledged, filed, forgotten beneath the avalanche of post-combat administrative work. May brings victory and chaos in equal measure. VE Day arrives on the 8th. Church bells across Europe. Soldiers weeping and dancing in city squares. Hitler's Reich collapsed into rubble and surrender documents. Rourke stands alone in Graufeld Square while distant celebrations echo across the valley. The fountain remains dry. The church clock still shows 3:51. He thinks of Lieutenant Marcus Holloway leading these men through the bulge, keeping them alive through winter that killed thousands. He thinks of Eddie Santos at his radio, fingers trained to precision, transmitting that final word with unnatural calm. He thinks of Daniel Whitmore, writing letters to a girl in Newark who will spend her life waiting for answers that will not come. That night, Rourke opens a bottle of schnapps taken from the village tavern. He pours 33 glasses, 1 for each missing man and 1 for Morrison's patrol. He drinks them all slowly, systematically, toasting empty air. The next morning, he begins writing letters. 32 envelopes addressed to 32 families across America. Not official condolences. Those telegrams have already arrived, stamped with military efficiency. These are different, personal. Rourke writes what he witnessed. The neatly stacked rifles, the stopped watches, the evidence of men who lived their final day normally, routinely, never knowing they stood at the edge of something vast. He writes that their sons and husbands and fathers served with honor. He writes that their disappearance remains unexplained but their sacrifice is witnessed. He writes that someone will remember, even when the files are sealed and the case grows cold. To Owen Delacroix's wife in Maine, he writes, "Your husband kept us steady through battles that broke other men. He spoke of your children every evening. Whatever took him, it could not take the love he carried." To Ruth Whitmore in Newark, he writes, "Danny kept your photo in his helmet. He believed he would see you again. That belief sustained him through darkness. Hold on to it, even now." The letters take 3 days to complete. His hand cramps from forming careful words, trying to give comfort where no comfort exists. He mails them on May 10th from the Remagen post office, watching the clerk stamp each envelope with red ink. Then he packs his gear and abandons the schoolhouse. New orders assigned him to occupation duty in the Ruhr Valley, processing surrendered Wehrmacht personnel and establishing civil administration. The work drowns thought in forms and requisitions and the grinding bureaucracy of peace. Graufeld becomes someone else's problem, which means no one's problem at all. By late June, the village receives official designation as a military exclusion zone. Army engineers erect chain-link fencing around the perimeter, posting signs in English and German. Unexploded ordnance. Entry forbidden. The signs are lies, but useful lies, the kind that prevent questions. Guards patrol initially, bored privates walking predictable routes. By August, the guard posts stand empty. By September, the signs weather and fade. The incident files migrate from active investigation to archived curiosity to classified storage. 3 copies of Walsh's report scattered to different facilities. 1 to the National Archives in Washington, 1 to Army Intelligence in Frankfurt, 1 to a warehouse in Maryland where boxes stack floor to ceiling in climate-controlled darkness. The Graufeld file becomes a ghost story among veterans. Old sergeants in VFW halls speak of it in whispers over cheap beer, the tale growing with each telling until it bears little resemblance to truth. Some versions claim the platoon was captured by werewolves. Others insist they discovered Nazi gold and deserted. A few whisper about experiments and temporal weapons and men unstuck from time. But the men who were there, Rourke, Walsh, the reconnaissance. The file arrives at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. in a battered cardboard box marked 89th Infantry Division, Casualty Reports, March 1945. A clerk stamps it with the date, August 3, 1946, and wheels it into the stacks on a creaking cart. The fluorescent lights hum overhead. Dust motes dance in the narrow aisles between floor-to-ceiling shelves. 2nd Platoon, Charlie Company, becomes a reference number. NARA 4112 G78 M17. No one requests it. Europe rebuilds. The Marshall Plan ships grain across the Atlantic. War crime tribunals convene in Nuremberg. American soldiers flood home on troop ships, filling college campuses on the GI Bill, marrying sweethearts, starting families in new suburban developments sprouting across the nation like mushrooms after rain. In Portland, Maine, Lieutenant Marcus Holloway's widow receives a pension check each month. She never remarries. The schoolteacher job he left behind stays unfilled. The district hires a younger man fresh from the service, so she takes work at a fabric shop on Congress Street, measuring yards of cotton print for housewives. On Memorial Day each year, she places a small flag in the garden of their bungalow on Munjoy Hill. No grave to visit, just the telegram folded in her Bible. Missing in action, circumstances unexplained. She dreams sometimes of Marcus standing in fog, calling her name. She wakes with wet cheeks. In Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Staff. Sergeant Owen Delacroix's children grow up in a shotgun house on North Street. The eldest, Marcus, named for Lieutenant Holloway, who'd been his father's friend, turns 9 in 1946. He remembers his daddy's voice on the phone from Camp Shelby before deployment, promising to bring home something special from Europe. His 2 younger sisters remember only the photograph on the mantel, their father in uniform, grinning beside a tank at Fort Benning. Their mother works double shifts at the hospital, her nurse's shoes squeaking down linoleum corridors. She keeps Owen's Purple Heart and Bronze Star in a velvet box. Every year on the anniversary of the telegram's arrival, April 2, 1945, she lights a candle at Sacred Heart Church. The priest says prayers for the missing. She kneels until her knees ache. Marcus Delacroix asks once, at age 12, if his daddy might still come home. Men turned up sometimes, found in POW camps the Russians liberated late. His mother shakes her head. Your daddy's with God, baby. but her eyes hold doubt. In San Francisco, Private Jimmy Chen's family receives their telegram at the grocery store they reopened after returning from Manzanar internment camp. His mother folds it without reading it aloud. Customers pretend not to notice. Jimmy had volunteered despite everything. Despite the camps, the suspicion, the signs that read "No Japs," because he believed in proving loyalty. The telegram offers no proof of anything, just absence. His younger brother takes over the store. He never speaks about Jimmy. When the neighborhood changes in the 1960s, when the grocer's son finds old letters Jimmy wrote home from basic training, he burns them in the alley behind the building. Too painful. The smoke rises toward the bay, dispersing. Across 32 American towns and cities, the pattern repeats. Telegrams arrive, families grieve. Time moves forward because it must. The men of 2nd Platoon become memories, then stories, then silence. The official file stays sealed. The Army's investigation report, Captain Walsh's meticulous documentation, First Sergeant Rourke's witness testimony, the photographs of stacked rifles and stopped watches, goes into a restricted section requiring special clearance. 3 people request it between 1946 and 1970. 2 are stonewalled by bureaucracy. The third, a journalist writing a book about unexplained military disappearances, dies in a car accident on Route 1 outside Baltimore before his manuscript is complete. His notes vanish from his apartment. In Koblenz, the German government quietly marks Graufeld as uninhabitable structural damage. The fence stays up. Locals know better than to question. The war left scars everywhere. One more cordoned village hardly registers. By 1950, maps begin omitting Graufeld entirely. Hikers who stumble near the area report disorientation, compasses spinning, a persistent smell like copper and old stone. They don't return. The 1960s arrive with their upheavals, protests, assassinations, moon landings. A postal worker in Remagen files a strange report with local police in 1962. He encountered an American soldier in outdated uniform asking, "What year is it?" The man vanished when the postal worker tried to respond. The report goes into a filing cabinet. No follow-up occurs. In 1971, French university students hiking near the Rhine photograph what they believe are historical reenactors. The images show men in 1945 U.S. Army gear standing in fog near Graufeld's ruins. But the faces look wrong, blurred, distorted, like reflections in moving water. When the students try to locate the reenactors for questions, they find only empty woods. The photographs run in a regional paper under the headline, "Ghost Soldiers of the Rhine." Readers assume it's a hoax. The negatives show something the printed images don't. Timestamps on the soldiers' wristwatches, all frozen at 3:51. By the 1970s, 2nd Platoon has faded from public consciousness entirely. A few veterans still gather at VFW halls, still share whispered stories over beer about units that disappeared during the final push. The Rhine fog. The village where time stopped. Most dismiss it as combat fatigue, trauma reshaping memory. One man, a former MP who'd been part of Captain Walsh's follow-up team, insists it happened exactly as reported. "I saw the rifles," he says, his hands shaking as he lights a cigarette. 32 tripods, perfect spacing, and the church bell, frozen mid-swing. His companions nod politely, change the subject. In 1978, Dr. Edmund Cartwright, a British military historian researching Nazi occult programs, rents a flat in Bonn. He's tracking Ahnenerbe operations, the SS division that investigated paranormal phenomena and ancient artifacts. His notes, recovered partially after his death, mention Graufeld 17 times. He's found references to Dr. Wilhelm Kress, a medical officer who conducted experiments there in 1942 to 43. Experiments involving temporal distortion and chronological displacement. Cartwright writes to colleagues that he's close to something significant. He schedules a trip to Graufeld for November 1978. On November 12th, his flat burns. Electrical fire. The German authorities rule. Cartwright dies of smoke inhalation. His research materials are destroyed except for a single page, blown out a window, and found in the street the next morning by a passerby. It contains 3 sentences. Graufeld, active. Kress may have succeeded. Chamber beneath village is not Nazi, much older. The finder returns it to the police. It's filed with the incident report. No one follows up. The 1980s pass. 2nd Platoon's family's age. Owen Delacroix's widow dies in 1984, her children scattering across the country. Marcus to Detroit for auto work, the sisters to Houston and Atlanta. They sell the shotgun house, divide the medals. The Purple Heart goes to Marcus, who keeps it in a drawer, unopened in its case. In Portland, Lieutenant Holloway's widow passes in 1987. She's 74. The obituary in the Portland Press-Herald mentions her husband lost in service during World War II. 3 people attend the funeral. She's buried in Evergreen Cemetery under a shared headstone. Marcus Holloway, 1919 to 1945, MIA, and Helen Holloway, 1913 to 1987, beloved wife. The National Archives moves its collection to a new facility in College Park, Maryland, in 1994. The box containing NARA 412, G78, M17 goes onto a shelf in Building 2. The climate control keeps the paper from yellowing. The box sits in darkness, surrounded by millions of other boxes, each holding fragments of lives and wars and losses beyond counting. No one opens it. Technology changes. The Internet arrives. Digitization projects begin, slowly, scanning millions of documents. 2nd Platoon's file stays analog, too obscure to prioritize. Conspiracy websites occasionally mention the Rhine disappearances among lists of unexplained military incidents, lumped with the Philadelphia experiment and Flight 19. No sources, no verification. Digital noise. By the year 2000, the last living relatives who remember the telegrams are few. Marcus Delacroix, now 63, works security at a Detroit auto plant. He still has the Purple Heart. His own children, 2 sons, a daughter, never ask about the grandfather they never met. Why would they? So many families have gaps, absences, men who didn't come home from wars. The fog over Graufeld thickens each March. Hikers in the Rhine Valley begin reporting strange encounters more frequently. A 2003 incident logged by German police in Koblenz describes a couple who found an American soldier sitting by the river, staring at the water. He wore vintage uniform. When they approached, he asked, "Is the bridge still standing?" They didn't understand. He stood, walked into fog, and disappeared. The couple, tourists from Munich, filed a report because it unsettled them. The police note the date, March 17, 2003. They note the time they found the couple, shaken, in a riverside cafe, 4:15 a.m. No follow-up occurs. In New Jersey, Ruth Whitmore lies in a hospice bed in Cherry Hill. She's 91, lung cancer. The nurses keep her comfortable. She drifts in and out of consciousness, talking to people who aren't there. Her daughter visits daily, holding her hand, listening to rambling stories about the war years, about waiting for letters that stopped coming. On September 14, 2003, at 2:30 a.m., Ruth wakes lucid. She tells the night nurse a man visited her room, a soldier, young, maybe 22. Ruth Whitmore's room at the Morristown Hospice smells of lavender and antiseptic. The third-floor window overlooks Route 287, where headlights blur past in the September drizzle. She's 91, weighs 83 pounds, and hasn't recognized her daughter in 4 days. But she recognizes the soldier. He stands in the corner at 2:30 a.m. when the night nurse finishes her rounds. Not where the shadows are deepest. That would make sense. He stands where moonlight slants through the half-open blinds, illuminating him clearly. He wears the uniform from the photograph on her nightstand. Olive, drab wool, garrison cap, corporal stripes on his sleeve. His face is Daniel's face from 1944, smooth-shaven, 23 years old, with those gentle eyes that had promised her forever before shipping out to Europe. "Ruth," he says, and his voice is exactly as she remembers it. She should be afraid. The morphine drip should make this impossible, but Ruth has been waiting 58 years for this moment. "Danny," her voice is a whisper, "you're not real." "I'm real enough." He steps closer, boots making no sound on the linoleum. "I'm sorry it took so long." The heart monitor beeps its steady rhythm. Down the hall, a television plays late-night infomercials. Ruth's arthritic fingers clutch the thin blanket. "They said you were missing, near the Rhine." Her eyes search his young face. "I waited. I never stopped waiting." Daniel, or the thing that wears his form, kneels beside her bed. This close, she can see details that don't quite match memory. His skin has a translucent quality, like oil on water. When he blinks, it's a fraction too slow. "I need you to deliver a message." His hand hovers near hers but doesn't touch. "Can you do that for me?" "To who?" "Anyone who asks about Graufeld, about the platoon." His voice carries urgency beneath its gentleness. "Tell them not to dig. Tell them not to come when the fog calls." Ruth's breathing quickens. The heart monitor's beeps accelerate. "I don't understand." "You don't have to." Daniel's form flickers at the edges, like a television signal fading. "We thought we could outlast it. 37 days we survived down there, carving our names, counting time. But time doesn't work the same in that place." "What place? Danny, what happened to you?" His eyes meet hers, and for a moment she sees something ancient looking back, something vast and patient and hungry. "The fog took us somewhere between moments," he says, "a place where time folds back on itself. We're still there, Ruth, all 32 of us. We're always there, living those same days over and over. Sometimes the loop breaks, and we slip through into other times, other places." The drizzle outside intensifies to rain. Ruth's daughter sleeps in a chair by the window, undisturbed. "I came to you in 2003, Daniel continues. "March 17th, the anniversary. I've been coming every year, but you only see me when you're close to the edge, when the walls between worlds get thin." Ruth remembers now. Fragments of dreams or memories, or something else. A figure in the fog outside her house. A voice calling her name across decades. The photograph she keeps by her bed, sometimes facing up, sometimes facing down, though she never moves it. "The message," she whispers. "Why?" "Because they're going to dig. In 2019, someone's going to find the chamber." His form grows more transparent. "If they open it fully, if they break the seal we made with our last breaths, it won't just be us anymore. The thing we've been keeping contained, it'll have a door into all times. Past, present, future." "What thing?" Daniel stands, fading faster now. Kress called it a temporal anomaly. The villagers in 1349 called it the plague fog. It's older than names, Ruth. It feeds on moments, on the space between seconds. We've been its prisoners, but also its jailers. Ruth tries to sit up, but her body won't respond. "Don't go. Please, Danny, don't." "Tell them," he says, his voice already distant. "Tell them not to dig." He's gone. The rain stops. The heart monitor's rhythm steadies. Ruth's daughter stirs in her chair, yawning, checking her phone. 3:47 a.m. "Mom, you okay?" Ruth stares at the corner where Daniel stood. The moonlight shows only shadows and the regulation beige paint of hospice walls. "He was here," she breathes. "Who?" "Danny. My Danny came back." Her daughter's expression softens with pity. "It's the medication, Mom. Why don't you try to sleep?" But Ruth grips her daughter's wrist with surprising strength. "He gave me a message. Write it down. Please, write it down." The daughter humors her, pulling a notepad from her purse. "Okay. What's the message?" Ruth speaks carefully, repeating Daniel's words exactly. Her daughter writes them down, not understanding, thinking this is dementia's final gift. A last coherent sentence before the fog of forgetting closes in completely. She doesn't notice that her mother's watch has stopped at 2:30 a.m., or that the photograph on the nightstand has changed. The one Ruth's kept by her bed for 58 years shows Daniel in his uniform, smiling at the camera. But now, if you look closely in the background, just visible over his shoulder, there's a figure standing in fog. 32 figures, actually, standing in a circle, waiting. 6 miles away, in the basement archives of the Morristown Public Library, a reference clerk named Tom Hendricks catalogs a donation of old newspapers. He's working the overnight shift, sorting boxes from an estate sale. The Morristown Daily Record, March-April 1945. War's end in sight. Headlines about the Rhine crossing, the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, the push into Germany's heartland. Tom's about to shelve the box when a smaller article catches his eye, buried on page 6 of the March 23rd edition. Local soldier among missing in Rhine Valley. Corporal Daniel Whitmore, Assault 23 of Morristown, is listed among U.S. servicemen missing in action near the Rhine River, according to a War Department telegram received by his fiancée, Miss Ruth Brennan. Corporal Whitmore's unit disappeared under unexplained circumstances. Tom checks the date. The article is 74 years old tomorrow. He makes a note to digitize it. Someone might want to see it someday. Someone. Researching family history or military records or unexplained events. He doesn't know that Ruth Whitmore, née Brennan, lies 6 miles away, clutching the message her Danny delivered across the impossible distance of time. He doesn't know that in 16 years, Dr. Sarah Vance will read his digitized article while researching Graufeld. He doesn't know that the fog outside the library is thicker than weather patterns can explain. But he feels uneasy as he carries the box to storage, as if the old newsprint is trying to warn him of something just beyond understanding. The library's clock chimes 3:51 a.m. Tom glances at it, frowning. The clock never chimes at that hour. The mechanism isn't programmed for it. But tonight, in Morristown, New Jersey, somewhere a door has opened just a crack. Somewhere between Ruth's hospice room and the library's basement, between 2003 and 1945, the fog has found a new path. And 32 soldiers, trapped in a loop of dying moments, sense a potential opening, a way to finally deliver their warning, before the chamber is found, before the seal is broken, before what waits beneath Graufeld remembers how to hunger in the present tense. Tom shelves the box and locks up at 4 a.m., never noticing the faint scent of copper and old stone that lingers in the stairwell, or the boot print in the dust that wasn't there an hour ago. The print of a 1940s Army-issue boot, facing the door, as if someone had been standing there, watching him work, waiting to be remembered. The 3 days of digging blur into a rhythm of scrape and sift, bucket and brush. Sarah Vance works with her team under a white expedition tent that flaps in the October wind, the fabric snapping like distant gunfire. Klaus Zimmermann mans the pulley system, hauling buckets of earth and stone from the deepening pit while 2 graduate students, Mara Chen and Lucas Hoffman, catalog each layer with meticulous precision. 12 feet down, they've passed through what should be there, topsoil heavy with decades of leaf rot, clay deposits from Rhine flooding, scattered brick from the village's abandonment. But then the impossible begins. River stones, smooth, water-worn cobbles that belong to the Rhine's bed 2 miles away. Hundreds of them, arranged in no natural pattern Sarah can decipher. Klaus photographs the layer from multiple angles, his usually animated face drawn tight. "Someone carried these here," he says in German-accented English. "By hand. Before the war, maybe during." Sarah kneels at the pit's edge, dirt crusting her knees. She picks up one of the stones, feels its weight. "Medieval, you think?" "Older." Lucas crouches beside her, pushing wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. "This wasn't construction. This was burial. Beneath the stones, timber beams blackened with age, their grain still visible despite centuries underground. Mara takes samples for carbon dating, sealing wood fragments in plastic bags with hands that tremble, slightly. The tests will come back later, 1340, give or take a decade, but Sarah already knows they've found something that predates any battlefield grave. "We should call the authorities," Mara says on the second day. She's American, like Sarah, a doctoral candidate from Berkeley who'd signed on for a straightforward excavation of war relics. Not this. Sarah wipes sweat from her forehead, leaving a dirt smear. "Tomorrow. Let's see what's under the timber first." They work by generator-powered floodlights as the afternoon fades, the pit now 15 feet deep, the walls braced with plywood to prevent collapse. The medieval beams end abruptly. Beneath them, bedrock. Solid limestone, the kind that forms the Rhine Valley's bones. Except it isn't solid. Klaus's brush reveals it first. A seam. Too straight to be natural, too precise to be chance. He works along its length, uncovering more. A rectangular outline cut into living stone, edges sharp as if carved yesterday despite the centuries of weight above. "Mein Gott," he breathes. Sarah descends the ladder, her archaeologist's instincts warring with something deeper, more primal. The air in the pit tastes different down here, metallic, old, like copper and stone, like the inside of a closed mouth. The seam outlines a space 3 feet by 2. A hatch? A grave marker? She runs gloved fingers along it, feeling for hinges, for any indication of purpose. Nothing. Just stone meeting stone in an impossible joint. "Tomorrow," she tells the team as darkness settles fully over the site. Fresh eyes in the morning. But sleep doesn't come easy in the small hotel in Remagen where they're staying. Sarah lies awake, listening to the Rhine somewhere in the distance, thinking about the German families who fled Graufeld in February 1945. 3 weeks before 2nd Platoon arrived. The local archives had been sparse on details, just a notation that the village council ordered evacuation, residents resettled in Koblenz, property left behind. No explanation why. Her phone glows on the nightstand. 2:47 a.m. She pulls up the project files, scrolling through the initial survey data. The electromagnetic readings that led them here in the first place show strongest directly above where they're digging. Anomalies, the geophysicist had called them. Buried metal, probably shell casings or vehicle debris. Standard stuff for a W2 site. Except the readings don't match any known military hardware signature. They pulse. Faint but regular, like a heartbeat deep in the earth. Sarah closes the file. Tomorrow, they'll open the stone. October 31st dawns cold and gray. Appropriate, Klaus jokes darkly as they gear up. Halloween. Sarah doesn't smile. She's brought in a structural engineer from Koblenz, an older man named Dietrich, who examines their pit with a skeptical eye and declares the walls stable enough for deeper excavation. But why dig deeper? He asks, peering at the stone rectangle. This is probably just a medieval drainage feature. Foundation work from the old village. Drainage doesn't show electromagnetic signatures, Sarah says, and it doesn't require medieval timber burial. Dietrich shrugs, climbs out. They're alone with it now, the team, the pit, and whatever lies below. They use small pry bars first, testing the seams give. Nothing. The stone is locked tight, sealed by time or design or both. Klaus suggests a pneumatic drill. Sarah vetoes it. Too much risk of damaging what's beneath. Instead, they work methodically around the perimeter, clearing more bedrock, looking for leverage points. It's Lucas who finds it. A second seam, perpendicular to the first, running down into darkness. Not a hatch. A staircase. The stone rectangle is the first step. Sarah stares at it, calculations racing through her mind. If this continues down at a standard medieval pitch, given the step's dimensions, we need to expand the pit, wider, follow the stairs down. Dr. Vance. Mara's voice carries an edge. We're already at 15 feet. This is beyond our permits, beyond our equipment ratings. I know. Sarah doesn't look away from the stone. Call the Bundespolizei and the American consulate in Frankfurt. Tell them we've found something that predates the war by 6 centuries. Tell them it's related to the 1945 disappearances. How do you know? I don't, but I need them here before I go deeper. The calls are made. By noon, a federal police detective named Werner Schaefer arrives, his face weathered and skeptical until he peers into the pit and sees what they've uncovered. He makes calls of his own, walking away from the tent with his phone pressed to his ear, voice low and urgent. By 1500 hours, a U.S. Army liaison is on site, Major David Porter from the 21st Theater Sustainment Command, Stuttgart. He's younger than Sarah expected, early 40s, with the careful posture of a career officer facing something outside his training manual. Dr. Vance. He shakes her hand firmly. I've been briefed on the 1945 incident. 32 men, Charlie Company. What makes you think this is connected? She shows him the survey data, the electromagnetic readings, the impossible layers of their excavation. This site was never supposed to be here. Grafeld was erased from maps after the war, declared uninhabitable, but nobody documented why. Porter studies the pit. And you want to keep digging. I want to follow the stairs, see where they lead. Tonight? Before the fog comes back. Sarah doesn't know why she says it. The weather forecast shows clear skies for the next 72 hours. But something in her gut, some instinct honed by years of excavating battlefields and graves, whispers that time is short. Porter consults with Detective Schaefer. They make more calls, permission is granted with conditions. Military observers present, structural monitoring, immediate halt if safety is compromised. By 1800 hours, they're ready. The pit has been expanded, the first 3 steps of the spiral staircase revealed, descending clockwise into bedrock. Each step is worn smooth in the center, evidence of centuries of feet treading this path. Medieval pilgrims? Nazi researchers? Sarah doesn't let herself speculate yet. Klaus and Lucas descend first, wearing harnesses clipped to safety lines. Floodlights illuminate their progress. 4 steps, 5, 6. The stairs are steep, the spiral tight. At 10 steps, they pause. Dr. Vance, Klaus's voice echoes up from below. You need to see this. She descends carefully, boots finding purchase on stone worn slick by time. At the 10th step, the staircase walls change. The bedrock is carved here, deliberate patterns cut deep into limestone. Not decorative, functional. Channels running down the walls like gutters, converging at the stair's outer edge. Drainage, her rational mind supplies, to keep the stairs from flooding, but the channels are too precise, too evenly spaced. And they're stained, dark discoloration that could be mineral deposits or could be something else entirely. They continue down. 15 steps. 20. The air grows colder, damper. The electromagnetic readings on her equipment spike, then flutter, then spike again. 30 steps. 40. At 53 steps, the staircase ends. Sarah's flashlight beam cuts through darkness that feels almost solid, illuminating a chamber carved from living rock. 12 feet across, circular, the ceiling arching overhead in a perfect dome. Medieval architecture, certainly, but the carvings on the walls? She steps closer, playing her light over them. Names. Hundreds of names, scratched into stone with varying degrees of skill. German names, Gothic script, dating back centuries if the linguistic evolution is any guide. And among them, newer additions in different hands. Lieutenant M. Holloway, March 17, 1945. Sergeant O. Delacroix, March 18, 1945. Parved E. Santos, March 19, 1945. The dates continue, descending chronologically along the wall in a spiral that mirrors the staircase above. March 20th, March 25th, April 1st. 32 names, each carved with increasing desperation, the letters growing shakier as the dates advance. The final entry, April 23, 1945. Beneath it, in Lieutenant Holloway's precise schoolteacher's hand, it waits. Gott im Himmel, Lucas whispers behind her. Sarah forces herself to move, to catalog, to think like an archaeologist instead of a woman standing in a tomb. Her flashlight sweeps the chamber's center. 30. The steel-reinforced platform groaned under the weight of 6 people and 70 pounds of equipment as it descended the spiral staircase. Sarah braced herself against the limestone wall, her headlamp beam cutting through darkness that seemed too thick, too heavy. Behind her, Klaus muttered coordinates into a handheld recorder. Ahead, Detective Schaefer's bulk filled the narrow passage, his service weapon visible beneath his jacket. Major Porter brought up the rear, his combat boots scraping stone with military precision. 37 steps, Klaus announced. Temperature dropping, 15 degrees Celsius now. Sarah's breath misted. They'd been descending for 90 seconds. The staircase spiraled clockwise, each step worn smooth in the center where countless feet had passed. Medieval construction, the engineers had confirmed. But the carvings along the inner wall were newer. Sarah ran her gloved fingers across them as they descended. PFC James Chen, March 17, 1945. Sergeant Owen Delacroix, March 17, 1945. The names repeated at intervals, each carved with different tools, different pressures, some shallow and hurried, others deep enough to have taken hours. 73 steps. Klaus's voice had tightened. Still descending. Schaefer's flashlight found more text, German this time, Gothic script from centuries past, Heinrich Bauer, 1349, Gott vergebe uns, God forgive us. How deep does this go? Porter asked. Sarah checked her altimeter. We're at 90 feet below ground level. The radar showed the chamber at 140. The air changed as they descended further. Copper and stone, just like the reports had described. But underneath it, something older. Decay that wasn't quite rot. Time that had gone wrong. 117 steps. Klaus's recorder clicked. Electromagnetic interference increasing. My equipment's glitching. Sarah's headlamp flickered, then steadied. There. Schaefer pointed ahead. The bottom. The staircase ended at a circular platform. Beyond it, darkness opened into space. Sarah stepped onto level ground, her boots finding purchase on smooth limestone. She swept her light across the chamber, and her breath caught. The dome stretched 40 feet across, carved from bedrock with medieval precision. Drainage channels cut into the floor in spiral patterns, all converging on the center. The walls rose 20 feet to an apex where a natural fissure split the stone, the only source of ventilation. But it was the carvings that made her skin prickle. They covered every surface. Names and dates spiraling down from the entrance in chronological layers. The oldest at the top, near the dome's apex, in Latin script so faded she could barely read them. Anno Domini 1349. Dies Irae. Days of Wrath. Below that, German names from 1608, French from 1782, more German from 1891, and at eye level, circling the chamber in fresh cuts, 32 American names, all dated between March 17th and April 23rd, 1945. Jesus Christ! Porter's flashlight joined hers. They were alive down here for over a month. Klaus moved along the wall, photographing each carving with a digital camera that kept losing focus. The dates descend in sequence. March 17th, 18th, 19th. Every day marked. Some multiple times, like they were counting. Sarah found Lieutenant Holloway's handwriting halfway around the chamber. His early entries were neat, measured. Day 3. No. Exit found. Radio dead. Men holding steady. Day 7. Water from fissure drinkable. Rationing holding. Delacroix leading prayer. Day 12. Chen says he hears something in the stones. Footsteps that don't match ours. The letters grew shakier as the dates progressed. Day 23. It comes during the fog. We see it now. Not all of us. Just some. Whitmore saw his Ruth. She was old. She was dying. He touched her hand, and she was gone. Day 31. Time is wrong here. Santos says his watch runs backward. Mine stopped. We stopped. We're the same moment over and over, and it's watching. The final entry, dated April 23rd, was 2 words carved deep enough to have drawn blood from whoever held the tool. It waits. Sarah. Schaefer's voice was tight. Center of the room. She turned. The spotlights Porter had set up illuminated the chamber's heart, and Sarah's professional detachment shattered. 32 skeletons sat in a perfect circle, facing inward. Each one cross-legged, hands resting on knees, skulls tilted forward as if in prayer or meditation. Dog tags lay in the center of the circle, arranged in a smaller ring around a flat stone that might have been an altar. The bones were clean. No tissue, no clothing except for rotted fabric scraps. But positioned with such deliberate care that Sarah knew they'd arranged themselves this way. They'd sat down together and waited to die. Forensics is going to have a field day. Porter crouched by the nearest skeleton, his light catching the name on the dog tags 5 feet away. PFC Eddie Santos, radio operator. Sarah knelt beside another. Even without the tags, she recognized him from the photographs in the archived file. Staff Sergeant Owen Delacroix. His right hand still gripped something, a photograph, protected in a waterproof pouch. His 3 children, smiling at a camera in 1943 Baton Rouge. The forensic implications hit her. These men had survived long enough to carefully prepare for death. Temperature just dropped 5 degrees. Klaus's voice cracked. In 30 seconds. Sarah's breath clouded thick now. The chamber's air had turned arctic. Equipment malfunction, Porter said, but his hand had moved to his sidearm. No malfunction. Klaus held up his electromagnetic reader. The needle was buried in the red. The readings are off the scale. Same signature as the 1945 radio. Whatever stopped time up there, it's still active down here. Sarah stood slowly, her headlamp sweeping the circle of dead men. They'd been here 74 years. Undiscovered. Waiting. For what? Her light found Lieutenant Holloway last. He sat at the circle's northern point, his skeleton larger than the others, his journal still clutched in his left hand. His right hand pointed at the flat stone in the center. Sarah walked closer. The stone was granite, out of place in the limestone chamber, roughly circular, 4 feet across, covered in symbols that predated any alphabet she recognized. At its center, a depression, the size of a human palm. Don't touch it, Schaefer warned. Sarah hadn't planned to, but as her light hit the stone's surface, she saw the handprint clearly. Old blood stained deep into the granite, and in the depression something gleamed. She knelt, pulled out a pair of forceps, and carefully extracted a small object. A wedding ring. Gold, engraved with initials D.W. and R.M., 1944. Daniel Whitmore and Ruth Morrison. The engagement ring he'd worn on a chain. Sarah's hands trembled. She'd pocketed Whitmore's photograph from his skeleton during the initial discovery, the one with the impossible 2003 message. Now she understood. He'd placed the ring here deliberately, left it for someone to find. Sarah, we need to document and extract, Porter said. This site isn't stable. But Klaus wasn't listening. He stood at the chamber's eastern wall, his camera forgotten, staring at something his flashlight had found. There's another passage. Sarah followed his gaze. Behind a natural column of limestone, barely visible in the shadows, a second staircase. This one descending even deeper. The carvings around it were older than anything else in the chamber. Not Latin, not German. Something that might have been Celtic, or older still. And recently, in chalk that glowed faintly under Klaus's UV light, 3 words in the Lieutenant Holloway's handwriting. Do not descend. Sarah's equipment chose that moment to fail. All of it, simultaneously. Headlamps, flashlights, cameras, recorders. For 3 seconds. The chamber plunged into absolute darkness. In that darkness, Sarah heard it. Footsteps, not from the staircase they'd descended, from below, from the second passage, coming closer in a rhythm that matched her heartbeat exactly. Then the lights flickered back. The chamber was empty except for the 6 of them and 32 skeletons. But the smell had changed. Copper and stone, yes, but now something else underneath. Fog, in a chamber 140 feet underground. "We're leaving," Schaefer said. "Now." No one argued, but as they climbed back toward the surface, Sarah looked back once. Her headlamp caught the circle of skeletons, still seated, still waiting. And in the center, she could have sworn the handprint in the granite stone was still wet. The ring burned cold in her pocket all the way up. The MIT physicists arrived on November 12th in a convoy of unmarked vans, their equipment wrapped in military-grade foam padding. Dr. Sarah Vance watched from the excavation perimeter as they unloaded instruments she couldn't name. Silver boxes bristling with sensors, laptop arrays displaying cascading data streams, portable electromagnetic field detectors that hummed with frequencies just beyond human hearing. The chamber had been closed to all but essential personnel since the discovery. Sarah had argued for academic access. She'd lost. Dr. Theodore Marsh led the physics team, a rail-thin man in his 50s whose MIT credentials came paired with Department of Defense clearances. He descended the spiral staircase without hesitation, leaving Sarah topside with Klaus and the federal police cordon that now ringed the entire site. "This is our discovery," Klaus muttered, arms crossed against the November chill. "They swoop in with their classifications and they have the equipment we don't," Sarah said quietly. She wasn't watching the tent covering the stairwell entrance. She was watching the fog that had rolled in at dawn, 3 weeks ahead of seasonal patterns, and refused to lift even as noon approached. The first results came up through the command chain. Major Porter, the U.S. Army liaison, briefed Sarah in a heated trailer that smelled of coffee and printer toner. "Quantum fluctuations," he said, sliding a printout across the folding table. "Probabilistic superposition at the subatomic level. Dr. Marsh says the chamber exists in multiple temporal states simultaneously." Sarah scanned the data, her archaeology background struggling with the physics terminology. "In English? The chamber is happening in more than one time at once." Porter's jaw tightened. "Past, present, maybe future, all overlapping. The 1945 timestamp on Santos's radio isn't a malfunction. It's still 1945 down there, in some quantum sense, and also 2019, and maybe 1349, when this whole thing apparently started. That's impossible. You found 32 skeletons that died in 1945 but show bone damage suggesting they lived for centuries." Porter leaned forward. "Impossible stopped meaning much 3 weeks ago." The German historians arrived next, archived parish records in tow from Koblenz's diocesan library. Detective Schaefer coordinated the briefing in the mobile command post, spreading yellowed documents across multiple tables. Graufeld's history is incomplete, the lead historian, Dr. Erika Bauer, explained in precise English. The village was refounded 3 times after total population loss, first in 1349, during the Black Death. The parish record states, "All souls taken by the fog in 3 days of March." The church bell rang alone. Sarah's skin prickled. 3 days in March. The second incident, 1608, occurred during the 30 Years' War. Swedish mercenaries occupied the village. 43 men vanished on March 19th. Their weapons were found stacked in the square. Dr. Bauer pulled another document. 1782, during a famine winter. The entire village, 207 people, gone overnight on March 14th. Refugees from neighboring towns avoided the site for years, calling it Das Hungernde, the hungry place. Klaus, invited to this briefing as the excavation's co-lead, spoke up. "And 1891? 17 people, mostly travelers sheltering from a storm, March 21st. The pattern is consistent. March, fog, total disappearance, and always the abandoned possessions arranged deliberately. almost, she hesitated, ritualistically. "Offerings," Schaefer said quietly. "Every time, the fog takes what's presented to it." Sarah thought of 32 rifles in perfect tripods, 32 helmets circling the fountain. The men of 2nd Platoon, standing in formation for an audience that wasn't human. The link to the Nazi research came through channels Sarah wasn't privy to, delivered by Major Porter with a classification stamp she wasn't allowed to photograph. "Unexplained," Porter said, the German word awkward in his American accent. The Nazi Occult Research Division. They were at Graufeld from 1942 to early 1943, running experiments under the direction of Dr. Wilhelm Kress, a medical officer attached to the SS. The file was thin. Most Ahnenerbe records had been destroyed in 1945. But what remained turned Sarah's stomach. Photographs of the chamber lit by harsh flood lamps. Wehrmacht soldiers standing where the skeletons now sat. Charts documenting temporal displacement events with clinical detachment. And Kress himself, a gaunt man with wire-rimmed glasses and the dead eyes of someone who'd stopped viewing humans as people. He was trying to weaponize this, Sarah said, reading the translated summary. Pause time for German troops, give them tactical advantages by moving through frozen moments. The program killed 17 test subjects before it was shut down in February 1943. Porter flipped to the final page. Kress supposedly committed suicide on February 28th, but his body was never recovered, and the chamber was sealed by his order before he died. Klaus leaned over Sarah's shoulder. Until the villagers fled in February 1945 and 2nd Platoon moved in. 30 days later, the fog came back. Sarah's voice felt distant in her own ears. Kress didn't close the door. He left it open. The suicide note arrived via courier from Berlin's Federal Archives, authenticated by 3 separate historians. Sarah read it in the trailer while freezing rain drummed the aluminum roof. "I have opened something that should not be opened. The chamber beneath Graufeld is not a place, it is a mouth. Time does not flow there. It pools, stagnates, hungers. My experiments did not create this phenomenon. I merely woke it. The subjects do not die. They persist, conscious, experiencing all moments simultaneously. I have seen them age and de-age, scream and fall silent, live and unlive in loops that spiral inward toward something I cannot comprehend. There is an intelligence behind the fog. It is old, older than humanity. It feeds on the spaces between seconds. I thought I was a scientist. I was a fool. God forgive me. It hungers now, and I have taught it to hunt." The note ended there, the handwriting deteriorating into illegible scrawls. Sarah set it down carefully, her hands steady through sheer will. "He didn't commit suicide," she said to Porter. "He went into the chamber. He's still there, isn't he? In some way." Porter didn't answer, which was answer enough. Dr. Marsh emerged from the chamber on November 18th, 6 days after descending. His team looked haggard, sleep-deprived, speaking in the clipped sentences of people who'd seen too much. "The electromagnetic signatures are strengthening," Marsh reported to the assembled command staff. "Since we opened the chamber, the quantum fluctuations have increased by 14%. It's like exposure to observation is energizing the phenomenon." "Can you shut it down?" Schaefer asked. "Shut down a localized breakdown in causality?" Marsh laughed without humor. "We'd need to collapse the probability wave, force the chamber into a single temporal state. That would require—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "A significant energy event, and we don't know what the consequences would be." Sarah spoke into the silence. "What happens if we leave it open?" Marsh met her eyes. "The fluctuations will continue to grow. Eventually, the temporal distortion will expand beyond the chamber, first to the stairwell, then to the excavation site, then—" He gestured vaguely upward. "The math suggests exponential growth. In 5 years, maybe 10, this entire region could exist in quantum superposition, past, present, and future bleeding together. Anyone caught in it would experience what those soldiers experienced." Decades in a moment, Sarah whispered, remembering the bone analysis. Trapped in a loop. Or scattered across time entirely. The decision to seal the site came down from NATO command on November 20th. Concrete trucks arrived the next morning, along with an Army Corps of Engineers detachment and enough steel reinforcement to build a bunker. Sarah was allowed one final descent before they closed it forever. She went alone, at her own insistence, descending the 140 steps with only a headlamp for company. The chamber waited in its eternal cold, the 32 skeletons gone now, repatriated to Arlington for burial with honors. Only the carvings remained, names and dates spiraling down the walls in desperate chronology. Sarah knelt where Lieutenant Holloway's remains had sat, running her fingers over his final carving. It waits. "I'm sorry," she said to the empty air. "I'm sorry you were alone. I'm sorry we couldn't stop it then." The chamber didn't answer, but as Sarah stood to leave, her headlamp flickered, and in that moment of darkness, she heard it. Footsteps, echoing from the depth that descended beyond the spiral stair, the passage Holloway had marked, "Do not descend." The footsteps had rhythm, purpose. They were climbing. Sarah ran. She emerged into gray daylight, gasping, and nodded to the engineers. They sealed the entrance that afternoon, pouring concrete in layers, embedding sensors that would monitor the chamber remotely. By nightfall, the spiral staircase was entombed beneath 40 feet of reinforced concrete. The official report, declassified in summary form, attributed 2nd Platoon's disappearance to unexplained temporal, phenomena of unknown origin, potentially natural, potentially exacerbated by 1943 experimental activities. Families received closure. The media reported it as a minor Cold War mystery solved through archaeological persistence. Sarah returned to Massachusetts in December, carrying one item she'd pocketed before the forensic teams cataloged everything. The photograph of Corporal Daniel Whitmore and his sweetheart Ruth, the one with the impossible 2003 message on its back. She had it framed on her office desk at the university, a reminder that some mysteries close around you like fog, leaving only questions. On March 17, 2020, at 3:51 a.m. Eastern European Time, every sensor embedded in the Graufeld concrete simultaneously registered an electromagnetic spike. NATO monitoring stations logged a transmission on a 1945 military frequency, analog. The December sky hung low and colorless over Arlington National Cemetery, the kind of winter gray that feels like morning made weather. Sarah Vance stood at the periphery of Section 60, watching as 32 flag-draped caskets were borne toward their graves with full military honors. 74 years late, but finally coming home. The ceremony drew a sparse crowd. Most families had scattered or died themselves. Time had claimed the wives, the siblings, the waiting sweethearts. But 17 descendants had made the journey. Sarah watched an elderly man in a wheelchair, oxygen tank at his side, clutch a Purple Heart that had sat unclaimed on a mantel in Baton Rouge since 1946. Marcus Delacree, Jr., named for the father he'd never known, tears sliding down weathered cheeks. A middle-aged woman placed a letter on one casket, addressed but never sent, found in Corporal Whitmore's effects from the Graufeld chamber. Sarah knew what it said. She'd photographed every artifact before repatriation. "Dearest Ruth, when this war ends, I'll take you dancing at that place by the pier." He'd never gotten to finish the sentence. The rifle volleys cracked across the winter air, 21 shots. Then silence, save for the wind through bare oaks and the distant traffic on Memorial Drive. Sarah had declined the invitation to speak. This wasn't her story to tell. It belonged to the men in those caskets, and to the families who'd waited 7 decades for closure. She was just the archaeologist who'd dug them up, but she carried their secrets now. That weight didn't fit in a speech. The German federal police had been efficient about the cleanup. By mid-December, the site was entombed beneath 40 feet of reinforced concrete, steel rebar gridwork creating a cage that extended 20 feet beyond the chamber's walls. NATO engineers had installed monitoring equipment, seismographs, electromagnetic sensors, ground-penetrating radar operating on continuous loops. The official designation, Contaminated Archaeological Site, Entry Prohibited. The real designation, in classified files Sarah wasn't supposed to have, Scene, Temporal Anomaly Zone, Priority Containment. She'd been debriefed 3 times. Army Intelligence, German BND. Finally, a man who'd shown no credentials but asked questions that suggested he knew more about Graufeld than anyone should. That interview had lasted 6 hours and concluded with papers she'd signed without reading closely, her academic career suddenly contingent on silence. They'd let her keep her research notes, most of them. The photograph, though, that she'd pocketed before anyone knew it existed. The ceremony concluded with taps, the lone bugler's notes hanging in the December air like a question without answer. Families filed past the graves, leaving flowers, photographs, folded flags. Marcus Delacroix Jr. placed his father's Purple Heart directly on the casket lid before they lowered it into frozen earth. Sarah waited until the crowd dispersed before approaching the grave markers. They'd been arranged in the same circle formation the skeletons had held in the chamber, some symbolic decision by the Army, honoring how they'd been found, how they'd died together, facing each other in the dark. Lieutenant Marcus Holloway's stone anchored the circle. She knelt before it, fingers tracing the engraved dates. 1918 to 1945. Except that wasn't quite true. The forensic reports had shown something the families would never know: microstructure damage in the bones consistent with extreme aging. The men had been 20 to 34 when they vanished. Their skeletal remains showed degradation patterns suggesting they'd lived much longer. Decades longer. Centuries, perhaps. Trapped in that chamber, experiencing time in loops or spirals while the world above moved forward. Dying over and over, or dying very, very slowly. The official explanation, wartime trauma and environmental factors, was bureaucratic fiction masking something no one wanted to speak aloud. They'd waited down there, all 32, and something had waited with them. It waits. Holloway's final carving scraped into stone with fingernails worn to the bone. Sarah stood, breath misting. The cemetery was emptying. She should leave. She had a flight back to Boston in 3 hours, a university position to maintain, a carefully normal life to resume. But she'd made one stop before the cemetery. A storage facility in Alexandria, climate-controlled, where the Army kept items too sensitive for standard archives. Her university credentials and the right phone call had gotten her 30 minutes with 2nd Platoon's cataloged effects. Most were mundane. Helmets, canteens, dog tags. Letters that families would eventually receive. But buried in the manifest was one item logged simply as unidentified radio equipment, non-standard issue. Eddie Santos's radio, still functional after 74 years underground. She'd been alone in the viewing room, had turned it on. The dial had still been set to the battalion frequency from 1945. Static hissed through the decades, interrupted by fragments. Voices too distant to parse, speaking in rhythms that didn't match normal speech patterns. And underneath, a sound like breathing, or wind through stone passages. The timestamp display had flickered, numbers scrolling. 0351-47, 03-51-48, 03-51-47, looping, caught. She'd turned it off before the attendant returned. Now, standing in Arlington as winter darkness gathered, Sarah felt her phone vibrate. Email notification. She almost ignored it. Some department meeting reminder or student grade appeal. But the subject line froze her. Graufeld monitoring alert. She'd set up automated notifications before leaving Germany, feeding her the same data NATO's security teams received. Seismic activity, electromagnetic fluctuations, anything anomalous within a 2-mile radius of the containment site. The email was sparse. Event recorded 17 DEC 2019, 0351 CET. Duration, 4 seconds. EM spike consistent with historical patterns. Radio frequency transmission detected on 1945 U.S. military band. Audio analysis attached. Sarah's hands shook as she opened the attachment. Earbuds plugged in. Static. Then, underneath, that single word in a voice that might have been Eddie Santos, might have been wind through stone, might have been something that had learned to mimic human speech. Fog. 4 seconds. Then nothing. She stood among the graves, the December cold seeping through her coat. Around her, the 32 stones formed their circle, each name a man who'd answered that call 74 years ago and never returned. The cemetery lights flickered on as dusk thickened. Sarah checked the weather app on her phone. Clear skies over Arlington. Clear skies over Boston, where she'd be tomorrow. But Graufeld, Germany, showed fog advisories. Dense fog, unusual for December. Expected to persist through the week. March 17th was 3 months away. The anniversary. The day when, for the past 74 years, the readings had always spiked most intensely. Sarah pocketed her phone and walked toward the cemetery gates. Behind her, the stones stood sentinel in their circle, guarding the men who'd finally come home, but whose battle, perhaps, was far from over. In her jacket pocket, wrapped in acid-free tissue, the photograph of Corporal Whitmore and his sweetheart Ruth. On the back, written in handwriting that forensic analysis confirmed was Whitmore's despite being dated 58 years after his official death. Ruth. I finally understand. I'm sorry. Tell them not to come when the fog calls. Danny, 2003. She told no one about that message. Told no one about Ruth's deathbed vision, about the impossible visit from a soldier who should have been bones in a German chamber. Tell them not to come when the fog calls. But they had come. Sarah's team, the investigators, the forensic specialists, they'd answered without knowing there was a call. They'd opened the chamber. They'd removed the bodies. They'd disturbed whatever waited below. The taxi back to Reagan Airport took 40 minutes through Washington traffic. Sarah spent it reviewing the data feeds from Graufeld on her laptop, cross-referencing with historical records she'd compiled. The pattern was undeniable. Fog events increasing in frequency since the excavation. 3 in November, 5 in December, each accompanied by electromagnetic pulses, each with faint radio transmissions on that 1945 frequency. The fog was spreading, or waking, or remembering. At the airport, waiting for her flight, Sarah composed an email to Detective Werner Schaefer in Germany. He'd been copied on the monitoring alerts. He'd understand. We need to discuss the containment protocols. The activity is accelerating. His reply came 20 minutes later. NATO is aware. Relocations beginning in January. 2-mile radius evacuation. Environmental contamination cover story. We've done what we can. Some doors, once opened. He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. The flight to Boston was delayed. Weather systems moving in from the Atlantic. Sarah watched CNN on the departure gate monitor, half listening to year-end news summaries. Then a breaking story. Unusual fog banks across Western Europe, transportation disrupted, meteorologists puzzled by the patterns. The footage showed the Rhine Valley, ribbons of white threading between hills. She boarded when they finally called her flight, settling into her window seat, laptop open to the monitoring dashboard she'd promised herself she'd stop checking obsessively. So 3:51. CET was 21:51. EST, 9:51 p.m. She'd be in the air. The plane pushed back from the gate at 9:48. Taxied, lifted into winter darkness over the Potomac. At exactly 9:51, her laptop screen flickered. The monitoring dashboard registered an event, but this time not just electromagnetic readings, seismic activity. Point source directly beneath the containment site, not an earthquake. Something moving, something rising, and then, captured by the audio sensors embedded in the concrete, sounds. Rhythmic, purposeful, footsteps. 32 pairs, ascending a spiral staircase carved into bedrock. The data stream cut out at 21:51:47. Sarah closed her laptop, hands trembling. Outside her window, darkness and scattered lights below. Somewhere over Maryland, heading home to her apartment in Cambridge, her office at the university, her carefully ordinary life.